Your paycheck doesn't disappear because you're bad with money. It disappears because something very small happens very fast, and almost no one is taught to notice it. There's a brief moment right after payday, barely long enough to register, where your financial future quietly tilts in one direction or the other. Most people never feel it as a choice. It feels like relief, like momentum, like permission. The balance updates, the tension releases, and before any planning kicks in, the mind switches gears. Waiting mode turns into spending mode. That invisible shift is where progress is either protected or quietly handed away. What makes this moment dangerous isn't the size of the decision, it's how automatic it is. While you're waiting for your paycheck, your brain is in restraint mode. Bills are looming. Plans are tentative. Purchases feel distant. But the instant the deposit lands, the psychology changes. The stress eases just enough to make room for reward seeking. Not reckless behavior, just small, justified treats. The kind that feel harmless because you've earned them. And here is the uncomfortable part. Your brain often starts spending the money before you even see it. While you're waiting, anticipation builds. When the deposit hits, that anticipation flips into imagined outcomes. Things you postponed suddenly feel available again. A meal you skipped last week. An upgrade you told yourself you'd get once things calmed down. Items that have been sitting quietly in online carts suddenly feel urgent, as if they've been waiting for this exact moment. The environment doesn't help. Your phone lights up. A bank alert confirms the money arrived. Then the algorithms do what they're designed to do. A limited time offer appears. A brand you follow announces a restock. A food app remembers your last order a little too well. None of this feels coordinated, but it's perfectly timed. You open your phone to check your balance, and the world politely suggests ways to reduce it. This is why so many budgets collapse without drama. Not because the math was wrong, but because the decision wasn't made on paper. It was made in seconds, under a mild rush of relief and reward. The plan lived in your head. The action lived in your thumb. Behavioral psychology has a name for this pattern. A cue triggers a craving, which leads to a response, followed by a story we tell ourselves to feel okay about it. The cue is the paycheck notification. The craving is the mental spending spree that follows. The response is frictionless action. One tap, a scan of your face, and it's done. Then comes the rationalization. You'll make it up next month. This wasn't that expensive. Things are finally moving in the right direction. That rationalization is what closes the window, not the purchase itself, but the promise that future you will fix it. What's important to understand is that this has very little to do with discipline. Modern payment systems are engineered to remove hesitation. The less friction there is, the less time your rational brain has to intervene. When paying becomes painless, spending speeds up, and research consistently suggests that the feeling of gain, seeing a higher balance, can be as stimulating as the purchase itself. The money hasn't gone anywhere yet, but the brain already feels rewarded. That feeling wants an outlet. So the question isn't how to build stronger willpower. Willpower fades. Plans get ignored. The real question is how to put something in place that moves faster than impulse. The simplest answer is also the least exciting. Decide what happens to your money before you see it. The first movement after payday matters more than everything that follows. If the first action sends money toward your future, savings, buffers, long-term priorities, it quietly rewrites the rest of the month. Everything else now has to work around what's already been protected. This isn't about restriction, it's about sequence. When paying yourself comes first, spending becomes a secondary decision instead of a reflex. But that system only works if the rest of your money has structure. And this is where many well-intentioned plans fall apart, at the definition of needs. Most people believe they know what their necessities are. In practice, those numbers tend to be inflated by comfort, convenience, and habits that quietly upgraded over time. A more useful way to think about necessities is to treat them as a survival baseline, not a lifestyle statement. A widely used framework is to keep true necessities under a clear percentage of take-home pay. Not because the number itself is magic, but because it forces trade-offs to become visible. When essentials are capped, every dollar above that line has to justify itself. True necessities are boring. Shelter that keeps you safe. Utilities that keep basic systems running. Food that sustains you, not entertains you. Transportation that reliably gets you to work. Healthcare and insurance that protect against real risk. That's the core. Everything else starts outside the line and has to earn its way in. Where things get tricky is in the grey zone. This is where expenses disguise themselves as needs because they feel normal. Subscription stacks you rarely use, phone plans built for features you don't touch, delivery memberships that exist to save time you're not actually short on, premium versions of basic services chosen years ago and never revisited. None of these are inherently bad. The problem is when they're treated as untouchable. A useful test cuts through most justifications. If your income stopped tomorrow, would this expense protect your safety or simply preserve comfort? Comfort has value, but it shouldn't crowd out resilience. When necessities drift too high, the consequences show up later in subtle ways. Savings feels impossible. Emergencies become credit card problems. Every unexpected expense feels like a setback instead of an inconvenience. It is not that the income is wrong, it is that too much of it is already spoken for. Cleaning this up doesn't require extreme cuts. It usually requires honest downgrades, matching plans to actual usage, repricing insurance as life changes, planning food so groceries stay foundational and dining stays optional, choosing reliability over status, cancelling things one at a time, and noticing how little you miss them. When the baseline is clean, something interesting happens. Optional spending becomes easier to enjoy because it's clearly optional. There's room to breathe. And that breathing room is what allows the next layer of protection to work. Before thinking about growing money, it helps to stop it from leaking. Two guardrails do most of that work: credit reliability and an emergency buffer. Credit is often talked about as a score, but in reality, it's a pricing system. It influences how expensive your future becomes. Rates, approvals, even certain opportunities are shaped by how predictable you appear on paper. And the margin for error is thinner than most people expect. A small number of missed or late payments can shift you into a more expensive category for years. What matters most here isn't optimization, it's consistency. Systems that make payments boring and automatic do more for financial stability than clever strategies. Late fees don't just cost money, they create cascades, higher balances, more interest, tighter cash flow, more stress. Reliability breaks that cycle before it starts. An emergency buffer plays a similar role. Its job isn't to earn returns or feel impressive. Its job is to absorb shocks so they don't spill into debt or panic decisions. When small emergencies are handled with cash instead of credit, everything downstream becomes easier. None of this is flashy. That's the point. Real progress rarely announces itself. It shows up as fewer fires, calmer months, and choices that feel less urgent. And it all traces back to that tiny moment after payday. When the money arrives and the brain leans forward, looking for a reward. If nothing is in place, the environment decides for you. If a simple routine is already running, the decision has been made. You don't need to outthink your impulses. You just need to get there first. If you want a quiet advantage over almost everyone else with money, it isn't a secret stock, a side hustle, or a viral trick. It's boring, it's mechanical, and it happens before emotion ever gets involved. Most financial damage doesn't come from big mistakes. It comes from tiny misses that compound quietly over years. A late payment here, a balance carried there, a plan that relied on motivation instead of structure. Once you accept that, the entire strategy shifts. The goal stops being perfection and starts being reliability. Start with the unglamorous stuff that protects your floor. Late payments are one of the most expensive errors people make, not because of the fee itself, but because of what it signals. In lending systems, consistency matters more than almost anything else. A single miss can echo for years, influencing interest rates, approvals, and costs you'll pay long after the original bill is forgotten. That's why automation matters so much here. When minimum payments are set to run on their own, you remove the risk of forgetfulness, bad timing, or an unusually busy week. Timing is more powerful than people realize. When bills are clustered shortly after payday, cash flow friction drops. Alerts act as early warnings instead of panic buttons. A small buffer sitting in checking absorbs minor mismatches, so a calendar quirk doesn't turn into an overdraft. And when things feel tight, proactive communication works better than silence. Lenders are often more flexible before a problem exists than after one shows up on a report. Splitting payments or shifting due dates can buy breathing room without long-term damage. There's also a quiet lever many people miss: statement timing. Balances don't just matter when you pay them. They matter when they're reported. Making a mid-cycle payment to bring balances down before statements close can help keep utilization lower without changing spending behavior. This isn't about gaming the system or chasing rewards. It's about protecting the rates you'll be offered for everything else in life. Once reliability is locked in, the next layer is resilience. This is where emergency savings comes in and where a lot of otherwise smart people sabotage themselves by trying to be too clever. An emergency fund has one job: to work when nothing else does. That means it needs to be boring, liquid, and predictable, not optimized, not stretched, just there. Real life doesn't send calendar invites. A car problem can land the same week as an unexpected bill. A medical issue can arrive when markets are already stressed. When emergency money is tied up in volatile assets or locked behind penalties, a manageable problem can turn into a forced sale or expensive debt. Liquidity matters more than yield when timing isn't yours to control. Many people aim to build this buffer gradually, and that's fine. What matters most is reaching the first milestone quickly, enough to cover a month of true essentials. That initial cushion changes behavior. Panic decisions drop. Credit stops being the default shock absorber. From there, automation does the rest, quietly building toward a larger safety margin without daily effort. With stability in place, the conversation can finally shift to growth. And this is where priorities matter more than creativity. Some opportunities have built-in advantages that are difficult to replicate elsewhere. Employer retirement matches are a good example. When contributions are matched, additional money appears simply because you showed up. Few financial mechanisms offer that kind of immediate leverage. Skipping it isn't conservative. It's leaving part of compensation untouched. Beyond that, simplicity tends to outperform complexity for most people. Broad, diversified approaches reduce the pressure to predict outcomes. Over long periods, consistency often matters more than precision. Starting earlier, even at modest levels, allows time to do work that effort can't replicate later. Delaying contributions doesn't just delay results, it can permanently shrink the outcome because compounding is asymmetric. Lost time is difficult to recover. Debt fits into this picture not as a moral issue, but as a mathematical and psychological one. High-interest balances quietly compete with long-term goals. There are different ways to approach payoff, and the best method is often the one someone can stick with. Some prefer attacking the highest rates first to reduce total cost. Others prefer clearing smaller balances to create momentum and free cash flow. The important thing is choosing one path and following it consistently, instead of bouncing between strategies and stalling progress. Tax considerations add another layer, but they don't need to complicate things. Different account types offer different trade-offs between flexibility today and tax treatment later. The right mix depends on income patterns, timelines, and personal circumstances, and it can evolve over time. What matters early on is using available tax-advantaged space efficiently before defaulting to more flexible options for shorter-term goals. At this point, the system has all its major components: protection, resilience, growth, and direction. But none of it works if it depends on daily discipline. This is where automation becomes the real engine. Money behaves differently when decisions are pre-written. When transfers fire automatically after payday, priorities are funded before temptation has a chance to weigh in. A short delay after the paycheck arrives allows funds to settle cleanly, then the sequence runs in the same order every time. Savings moves first, goal-specific transfers follow, obligations are covered. Whatever remains is clearly discretionary. Separating discretionary money from core money changes behavior more than most people expect. When lifestyle spending lives in its own lane, it stops bleeding into essentials and long-term plans. The question shifts from, "Can I afford this?" to, "Is this worth using this month's fun money?" That subtle change reduces guilt, second-guessing, and accidental overreach. One of the most common failure points comes later, when progress creates space. A balance disappears, income increases. Suddenly there's extra cash flow, and without an update to the system, that space fills itself. Lifestyle quietly expands, and the opportunity vanishes. The fix isn't motivation, it's rules. Every raise and every payoff triggers an automatic increase somewhere that serves future goals. The redirection happens before the new normal sets in. Friction also has its place. Small delays on non-essential spending can prevent decisions made at the worst times. Late at night, stressed, bored, or overstimulated. Removing one-click convenience or using a separate account for discretionary spending introduces just enough pause to let intention catch up with impulse. What emerges from all of this isn't rigidity. It's freedom through structure. When the system runs on its own, money reaches its jobs without negotiation. The first moments after payday stop being dangerous and start being productive. Over time, the gap between people who rely on motivation and those who rely on systems becomes enormous. Income matters, but behavior matters more. Someone with modest earnings and a reliable setup can quietly outpace someone making far more who improvises each month. Not because they're smarter, but because fewer decisions are left to chance. This isn't about winning fast. It's about removing friction, reducing regret, and letting time work on your side instead of against you. Years from now, the process will feel almost laughably simple. And that's usually how the best systems feel. Obvious in hindsight, invisible while they're working,